Welcome to the Digital Dose, the show where we talk about what actually takes to make healthcare technology work at scale. I'm your host, Zelcha Emmanuel, and my guest has over 60 years in information technology, and he's spent that time building a model that the federal government IT world has never quite seen before. He created the Reddix Group to solve what he calls elastic problem, the kind of complex multi-agency mission critical IT challenges that traditional prime contractors are too rigid and too slow to solve. He worked with the Department of Defense, the Department of Health and Human Services, SAMHSA, and the agencies across the federal enterprise. He is a program management pioneer, a quantum AI innovator, and the architect of peer-to-peer network business model that is reshaping how the government gets IT done. Joe Reddix, welcome to the Digital Dose.
I really want to thank you for this great opportunity. One of the things I really miss that I see now is the podcast and to be able to relate a lot of the ideas. And you're right, I've been at this for 60 years since 1966 when I was in high school and formed a passion for this. That passion has lasted for now over 60 years. Now, I'm from Gary, Indiana, and I live 2 blocks from the Jackson Five. So, there's a lot of talent that I have to live up to. I didn't sing or dance, but I had how can you say this, a major interest in technologies that I developed reading comic books. So that's what got me into computers. Since I've been in it for so long, I've been able to work all the way from understanding key punch to quantum technology. Major focus right now is quantum AI and autonomous technologies. I'm a FAA Part 107 certified drone pilot. And actually, when I was taking my instruction, I was teaching 3 other people who also got their FAA certification, same time I got mine. Now, the beauty in this technology, and we're going to get into healthcare too, but the beauty in the technology areas that I'm involved with cover a lot of areas. Major area right now, of course, is cybersecurity. We're talking about quantum level key encryption, all that kind of stuff. Now, the importance of technology and things like healthcare is unmeasurable. I mean, quantum, for example, is MRI. And using for scanning the brain and all that kind of thing, magnetometers and all that. So when you look at it from a quantum perspective, it's been around a long time. Now, and looking at things like artificial intelligence, people think like, oh, that just popped out maybe 3, 4 years ago. And it's been around a long time, as long as you've had co-pilots to airplanes, trains, and things like that. That was a predecessor to where we are like now with quantum. And I have to bring this out because you don't have to be a physicist to understand and use quantum, which is really, really, really good. I'm not a physicist, but the people I work with, a lot of them are. And so the beauty in this is that I take my system integration capability, and you are talking about systems integration as a main focus for Reddix Group. I created a concept about 20 years ago called master systems integration, which includes integrating artificial intelligence, integrating hardware, machines, and things like that, integrating the human aspect of it, and creating levels of diversity in these kinds of emerging technology fields. So, a lot of the areas that relate to emerging technology is not just dealing with the technical, but the human aspects of it. Now, one of my favorite subjects, and I've been working with it now for years, is AI. And the pilot, the actual product that I use is Copilot. Now, I've used others and stuff like that, but I've been testing Microsoft's products since DOS days. Actually, I predate DOS. I met Bill Gates when he was only worth maybe 1.2, 1.4 billion. But you know how that goes. But the beauty is when you're looking at all these technologies and how they can interface into subjects like healthcare, you find that there's a historical perspective that led to all of this. In other words, it didn't just flip a switch. Healthcare and things like that have been using technology for diagnosis and all this kind of stuff, and also for training. Now, when you look at how artificial intelligence plays into that, for example, it makes your decision as a physician or whatever potentially much more accurate. Okay? In other words, it's kind of like a backstop. You can do a lot of research and you can do it instantaneously. So the more you put into these technologies, like whether it's healthcare related information from a practitioner or subject matter expert, the larger the vocabulary and capabilities of AI, for example, and within that, these large language models, which really is code, but it's based on being able to synthesize massive amounts of data. Your brain really is a quantum computer. So if you look at why they're coming up with AI and quantum, basically it's an offshoot of what we already have. Well, computers and things like that replace us. Not if you don't let it. Okay. It's a tool. It's like anything else. It's like, did my cell phone replace me? No. Okay. And the beauty is, it's just like a love for chocolate. It's going to always be there with you as long as you like chocolate. So I kind of like the idea of using AI because I really understand it. And just to give you a quick one, this is really funny. One of my first prompts in the AI is tell me about Joe Reddix, president and CEO of the Reddix Group. So it took about maybe about a second. I came back with a one pager. And it surprised me because I said, how in the heck could it come up with that kind of stuff? Hold on a second. How long you've been in the industry, what you've done, and things like that. And it was so accurate. I said to myself, the only way it can get like that is because you put that level of accuracy into technology. And it went out and it found it. So, be honest with you, be careful what you wish for because everything that you say and do, there's some kind of technology that may be recording it, for historical purposes or whatever. Either way, just be careful what you say. Now, the beauty is in this is that these tools are really, really important for any kind of growth. Healthcare wise, I look at it for my own diagnosis of issues that I might have and all that, and it's really helped out a lot. Okay. And whether you had surgery on your vocal cords, like I did at one time, I did all that research and technology really helped me to understand it. So when I went in there and talked to my doctor who was getting ready to do the surgery a couple of weeks before, he was surprised that I knew about the lasers and things like that that he was going to use. And I felt kind of good going out of there. And I basically told him, make sure you don't drink anything the night before. But the beauty in this whole thing is that these tools are what we make them. Okay. We can't take them for granted, meaning that they're not like your best bud and all that kind of stuff yet, but they're leaning toward a more humanistic approach. So you hear terms like artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence, and then artificial superintelligence. All of these AIs could move into healthcare, could move into transportation, it could be moved into things like logistics and all of that. So those are things I've been mastering now for 60 years, how to integrate all these technologies. And again, come from all the way from punch cards. Now, most people don't understand that punch cards actually existed, but computing now versus what it was then, if there's anything better than night and day, that's what it is. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Joe, your career in IT spans back to 1967. That's over 60 years of watching the industry transform from mainframes to cloud to AI. When you look back at the beginning, what's the problem where you're trying to solve? Did that original mission shape everything you built after?
Being an African American in the field, when I got into the Navy, I was actually it was called machine accountant when I went into the Navy in '68. Then it became data processing technician. But out of the 4 years I spent in the Navy, I've never met anybody else that was in my particular field. So that was different. Now, I really liked the field, so, it didn't really bother me that much, but the Navy gave me an opportunity to come from Gary, being a minority, to get into a field, to grow the field from the standpoint of locations where you're stationed and things like that. I was stationed at the same place where, Eric Snowden stole all that information, see? So
What?
Eric Snowden stole all of this personal information and things like that was being gathered by the intel communities and all that. And I was stationed at that same place, years before Snowden did all of that. But what I learned from working with IBM 1401 computers and all of that was that this is the place to be. Years later, I made the right move. I mean, you can have a whole lot of fun in this industry, especially when you really look at it as a tool versus a replacement for you, which I don't ever think is going to happen. But the to really answer your question, it was really finding ways to navigate a future in this field because I know when a lot of people look like me in it. So I stuck out. So I said, okay, I got a choice here. Do I go in and be mediocre? Or do I go in and own this bad boy? I decided on what I just said to own it. So I went ahead and studied the free inch manuals, did the videos as much as I could to learn about the foundational aspects of technology. Now, root level knowledge is very important. To me, it created what I felt was the beginnings of the passion. Once I understood it, and I started coding. And by the way, coding is a lot of fun. I mean, a lot of fun. It's kind of like being a Mozart or Rembrandt, and then being able to put that kind of focus into something that other people use. I've written programs for Fannie Mae that handle billions of dollars, which I thought, was kind of cool, by my money. So I said, okay, they give you these kind of things to do and you get them done and you really learn a lot more. At United Airlines, I worked in payroll and redesigned their payroll system. I saved them about maybe 1.2 million a year or whatever. But what that taught me was how to stay focused and accurate. And then when you're looking at what you've produced, it's just like anything else. It's just like being a singer and knowing that you really know what you're doing. You get offered jobs and things like that. You get a chance to go overseas. I flew over to Spain one time for American Express, and it was a problem with a system that I had designed. So I solved the problem in about 15 minutes. Now I'm in Madrid, Spain. So they really liked it so much. They spent $1,600 in taking me out to dinner, which was really good, by the way. So it's really rewarding to be able to have knowledge and knowledge that is evolutionary, meaning it grows as you grow. Okay. So now I'm passing it on to K through 12 over at Fort Meade, which is right down the street from me. And of course, the National Security Agency is part of Fort Meade. So I'm working in those kind of environments. Over the long haul, if I had to do all over it again, I'd do it a million times more because it is really, really something that has motivated me and basically probably a reason why I'm still alive because I really enjoy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's important that you love what you do. What
Yes.
was the moment that you realized that traditional IT contracting model was fundamentally broken?
That's a real good question. When I came out of the service and I went to work for a bank, and I saw there were idiosyncrasies in the way bank had transactions and things like that, I watched how technology was used to marginalize certain segments of our society. That's when I realized there was something was wrong. I wrote a program that used zip codes. The program ran about 6 hours, but it showed where the money came in and it showed where the money went out. And I said, wait a minute, that's kind of interesting. This system is not right. People were being charged X amount over here, but not over here for demand deposit accounts and regular savings and things like that. That's when I thought there was something wrong with the way technology was being implemented. Fast forward, you see different practices in the use of artificial intelligence, redlining and things like that, that you will say to yourself, well, why can't I, when I can buy a home over here and all these kind of things? So you see all of these tools could be used in a number of different ways. And I tell people AI, for example, could do three things very well. It can create, it can destroy, and it can do both at the same time. And all quantum does is optimize what I just said. See? So that's kind of like why I found out. I said, wait a minute, something got to change here. That's why I stayed in it. There wasn't that many people in it like me. I said, okay. I got in it and coming from Gary, I worked for the bank. So I learned a lot about human nature because of the technology. See?
Absolutely. Well, you developed a concept called peer-to-peer network business model for the global master system integration at a time when everyone else was doing the traditional prime sub hierarchy contracting structure. Where did that idea come from, and why were you so convinced that the old model couldn't solve the problems you were seeing in the federal IT?
The technology was so advanced that, for example, healthcare.gov back in the Obama era, and these things are very complex per se because they're integrated. Now, if you know how to integrate and why the integration works, you have a pretty good way of figuring it out. But if you don't, it's just like you don't know what Legos would help you build something. You got Legos sitting there on the floor, but you don't know what they can do. And the
Uh-huh.
idea is you try different Legos out and all of that. What I found out is the technology was so advanced, even the federal government can keep up with it. They had COBOL. It was still running with common oriented business language. Make a long story short, there was a lot of historical reasons why, I had to move from a prime sub. The subcontractors wasn't getting their just due. So I came up with a peer-to-peer model, much similar to a software startup out of Silicon Valley, so that it's more equitable and the advance of knowledge is a lot more even. In other words, not top down, it's horizontal.
Absolutely. Well, with that being said, what did you see the government agencies you were working with say when you first presented this approach?
I had to explain it to them first. And then a peer-to-peer model going up against something that was so established as prime sub, you know what happened there. I mean, we got the big players that are sitting and saying, "Oh no." But the government understood they have to really do stuff. They have to create stuff. They have to have the solutions. And not necessarily the bigger players were capable of doing it as advanced or as fast as, say, my company. Okay. And you still got places, but when you learn that you could do a lot cheaper, for example, things like the Veterans Administration, they spent $1 billion on an electronic health record system that didn't work. Okay, those are the kind of things that started to cause some serious problems. And I'm a veteran coming out of the Navy. So when I realized, wait a minute, there's a lot of money down there that's not going the right place. So how do you get it to go to the right place? Well, the model of prime sub had been there for so long. The peer-to-peer model indicated that that would be more attractive to startups, more engaging of bright minds, probably better to teach because you're not teaching a hierarchy that is frozen in place. You're combining the old and the new, things like that. So that's why I created the peer-to-peer model. Now it's being used in master systems integration. And again, master systems integration is the integration of these advanced technologies. So quantum, the AI, the autonomous, when you integrate them together, you find by having a peer-to-peer team, the creativity is more enhanced. You can come up with better ideas because you're integrating different thoughts from other people because they see kind of like you have a nice framework and you're not afraid to engage their new structures or the way they want to do things. It's very collaborative. That's probably the best way to put it. Okay.
Makes sense. Well, you were at Fannie Mae early in your career and developed a process for delivering customized mortgage loans via the
Yeah.
internet that led
Yeah.
the U.S. patent application. Most people don't associate federal IT program management with patent level innovation. What did that experience teach you about what's actually possible when you think differently inside a large institution?
Well, first thing, I led this, so it taught me that we can create a patent. I would, you know how you see people with patents and they're making a lot of stuff and all that, but I had to sign the patent away. But I didn't sign the knowledge away. So when you look at patents and things like that, and you're looking at creativity, it really makes you feel good that you can get to that particular level. Writing something that is probably extremely revolutionary in what I call inline memory quantum computing. Now, when you look at patents, this is kind of like a patent strategy. You build something that integrates both what exists now and what can exist in the future. In other words, those pathways and how they can interrelate and all that kind of stuff. Those kind of patents are coming across as extremely valuable because they're enhancing the base technologies. They're making them affordable and cost effective because you can layer and grow. Okay. And when you look at how technology is used, you open up a lot of different avenues, more than your base solution that you had in the beginning. In other words, there's a lot of things come about as you're evolving. So more and more patents potential and stuff like that. Like we're working on a project to put data centers in abandoned mines. Now, most people wouldn't think about that. They say, well, why do you want to put a data center in an abandoned mine? Because constant temperature, the mines may have water protection, things like that. And you can use those technologies for different things. The water that cools the computer systems in a data center could also be used in the wintertime to heat homes. It could be used for cooling. And the opposite side of it in the summer, it can be used for cooling. But the idea is using these technologies and solutions like putting a data center in a mine. I mean, come on, it's kind of like, well, why did somebody ever think of that? The idea is there now because we're running out of certain resources. Data centers are so prevalent. Communities are saying, "Oh no, I can't have all of that." But man, when you got that kind of multi-acre site and drawing power and all that, you know what I mean? It creates a lot of problems. So technology creates a problem that you can solve by using technology, but then where you put the technology, okay? And you got California alone, you got 58,000 abandoned mines. So you see how this could really grow? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, where does that inventor's mindset show up in how you lead TRG today?
And how I instruct the young ones. And
Yeah.
how I bring their minds into the awareness of what they could achieve and things like that. You show them how their cell phone could be used to run a business. You show them how they can use AI to create not a document by scratch, but to accent your thoughts and things like that, to make it believable, to make it something that others may want to do. And that's kind of like what my job is. I'm showing people why technology is important in their lives because they're surrounded by it and they might as well engage it so they can be part of where it goes from here to there, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Well, the Reddix Group assembles integrated programs, teams, IPTs for federal healthcare IT projects. For
Mhm.
someone who has never heard that term, explain what an IPT actually is and why assembling the right one is the difference between a federal IT project that works and one that becomes a headline about wasted taxpayers' money.
That's an excellent question. See, integrated program team. Okay, take the first word, integrated. Take the last word, team. See what I mean? So you have talent from different levels to do certain things. It's just like saying, okay, I go into a barber shop, but why do I want a certain barber? Because the barber knows how to cut your hair. Okay. It's the same thing when you're dealing with certain technologies and things like that. You combine the subject matter and practitioner level knowledge in a team perspective. Okay. So one moment in time, another person or company could lead the team. Reddick's group has a rotational kind of management structure. So peer to peer allows that rotation. So leadership could be learned or implemented by a team member who really wants to do that if they have that capability. Peer to peer allows that to happen. And then it brings out, in my opinion, the best in a person because they're not trying to do something that they're not qualified to do. We find people that weave that part together. So it's just like a shoelace is nothing without a shoe. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, what's the most common mistake agencies make when they try to staff these teams themselves?
That's a good question too. Most of it is when they're creating a statement of work. Some of them may not necessarily know what kind of work they want to have done. So they put out an RFI, but then a request for information. But that's probably the biggest thing is that they make mistakes because it's moving so fast. Okay. And most people in the government may have been there, and this is the way we've done things and things like that. And they got to maintain legacy systems. So they really don't have a recourse. They got to maintain what they got. Now, I come in there and say, okay, that ain't going to work. We need to look at where what you have can move to where you want to go, that kind of thing. Budget wise, you know as well as I do, can say the federal government sometimes can be called and wasting money, kind of do that. But it slows down when you start creating solutions that actually work.
Mhm.
Then taxpayers sit there and say, I like this program. I like this portal. I like being able to go over here and use this technology because it's helping me. It makes my job of filing my taxes much better. It makes my job as far as doing things with Social Security. See, when a tool is valued, you want to keep it and you want to keep it, you want to grow it. You see my point? If it's bad, it takes a long time to take bad technology out more so than it takes to bring good technology. Because bad technology could be more of a stovepipe thing, stovepipe mentality, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Those are the things that hurt. stovepipe. Like, well, this is the way we've always done it for 50 years. Well, it's 50 years later and it ain't working. See my point?
Absolutely. Well, Joe, you've worked on some of the most consequential federal healthcare IT projects in the country, including the SMAHSA's National Survey on the Drug Use and
Yeah,
Health,
SAMHSA.
370 million IT investment, and the Department of Health and Human Services Child Support Enforcement System, a $2.2 billion project. When you're operating at that scale, what does program management actually look like day to day? And what keeps those projects from
Huh.
the kind of failures we read about?
Well, for me, it's like striving for perfection. I've been a PM, a project management professional and certified and all that kind of stuff. But it helps structure your mind because you're dealing with money, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with technology, you're dealing with the unknown, you're dealing with a lot of different factors that you have to have up in the air at the same time. So it teaches you how to juggle, but it also teaches you the awareness of value of what you're trying to do. And then how to sell it to your leadership, you know? And once you sell it to the leadership, that could be your bonus at the end of the year, you know what I mean? So the beauty in that is that it teaches you a lot of things, but complacency is not one of them, okay?
I hear you. Well, where do most large federal healthcare IT projects start to break down? What's the early warning signs you watch for?
When they're not listening to the user needs, they're building something that the user doesn't want, okay? Or they're trying to integrate a solution like electronic health records that it does more damage than it does good, but you don't find out until you spend a few billion, you know what I mean? So these are the things that hurt. But then that's part of a leadership strategy. So, you brought up program management. Well, project program and portfolio management is my level of expertise. Given the, but as you can see, combining those skills, soft skills and leadership skills into your tech skills and things like that, you do a lot of research to find out what works in other countries, what works in other states, and may work in other disciplines. Like, okay, here's something in healthcare that could work in another area. Those are the kind of things you find that, oh, okay, now I can see how the value could be engaging in other areas. And as a consultant, you're looking at me, I can start working over here as a consultant too. So I moved from healthcare, for example, into transportation. See?
Wow.
That,
So you work that makes sense. I love that. You're working at the frontier of quantum AI. Your team participated in workshops led by the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense and Research Engineering,
yeah.
shaping the future of AI, ML, and Department of Defense for a
Yeah.
healthcare IT leader listening right now who's still trying to figure out the regular AI. What is quantum AI and why should they be paying attention to it now?
Okay. Anything that requires precision, and life and death, that's precision enough right there. Those are the reasons why AI and quantum can be very important because if you look at where things are going, let's just take quantum for example. Quantum could be a sensor small enough where it can enter your body and determine a lot of the characteristics of your cancer that a doctor or external devices can't. Now, that quantum device being a sensor is gathering all this information. And because it's quantum, it has an enormous memory, which means it's collecting a lot of data as it's going through your bloodstreams and things like that. And
Mm,
if it's the right type of sensor, quantum sensor, it can transmit that data real time to your doctor. So they see more than just a graph going up and down. They're looking inside your body like you wish you could.
mm.
Those are the kind of things that are happening because diagnosis of diseases and things like that, especially COVID and all these things, they require quick turnaround. For example, creating a cure and all that kind of stuff. We can't wait 2 or 3 years for something like with COVID. We had to get on that real quick, and we did.
Yeah.
I think it was called Warp Drive or something like that. Either way, those are the kind of things that bring to your attention why this is so important. The lives you can save, the amount of stress you can have by having a technology that tells you through your phone that you may be developing an engine problem. All that stuff is happening. So it catches the problem before it becomes catastrophic, that kind of stuff. Same thing with health. It catches your problem with your heart or whatever before it becomes catastrophic, that kind of stuff.
Wow. Well, what does the practical timeline, when does quantum AI start showing up in the healthcare systems in a way that affects how we deliver care?
Well, magnetic resonance and okay, the MRI and things like that, kind of like when quantum came on board because they use it because of brain waves, you know what I mean? And the magnetometers and things like that because they can gauge certain activities in the brain and in the body. So years ago, to bring those tools into the game for measurement of stuff, being able to view things that you can't do with the naked eye and do it in a extremely fast fashion. See, that's been around a long time. That's why MRI and healthcare is so important because it was the vanguard of the use of quantum. So people say, "Well, what is quantum?" Well, you get a brain scan and things like that. You're starting to deal with that kind of stuff. That's what it is. But now you see
Wow.
how it works. You see on your screen as the big machine is reading your mind and all of that, looking at your brain waves and all. I wish I would have had that years ago with some of the people that were my bosses. I'm trying to figure out what the heck are they talking about? Oh, I shouldn't say that. Either way, that was a sideline joke, but it was true though.
Oh.
It was true.
I hear you. I love that. You've been active on LinkedIn for 21 years and have used it primary tool to manage your TRG globally and build your peer-to-peer network. Most executives treat LinkedIn, as a resume. You treat it, differently, like an operating system for business.
Mhm.
What does that actually look like in
Well,
practice?
first of all, I can go global. Okay, I'm 24/7. Money never sleeps. You know the deal. And the thing I like about it, I can do comparison shopping. I'm comparison shopping for a vendor to help me with a particular solution. Like an individual, I got about 8,500 on my LinkedIn. Some top-notch people, by the way, okay? It introduces you to the world. It makes the world at your fingertips. It allows the world to become a research tool. It does. And I can see pictures, faces, they do diagrams, you can connect and you can strategize on some things that you have like-minded interests. And I actually have helped LinkedIn develop some of their group strategies and things like that that they use on the tech. They came to me and said, I have some input. See, the idea of a tool like that, it's like anything else that's visual. You get a chance to interact. Okay, you can get a chance to evaluate a what if. Okay, scenario meaning you're looking at two different products from two different vendors, and then you look at the way they bring the product out, and you could do what ifs, and then you can actually communicate directly with them to do live hypothesis on solutions. It makes it much easier to solve problems when you're networking.
Absolutely. Well, what's the thing most federal IT contractors are getting completely wrong about building relationships in the government space right now?
Small vendors are very important. The arm can't do anything without the fingers, per se. So they get that wrong because normally the larger institutions are more top down to keep the task that they like and stuff like that, which may not necessarily solve the problems, but the trickle down thing doesn't necessarily work, especially when you're dealing with emerging stuff that they're trying to learn themselves. Okay. So small businesses and nimble businesses like mine, I'm a consultant and I've been at it for so long. It's hard to find people with that kind of a resume. And then knowledge of how to use the tools effectively. Like you asked me about LinkedIn. I mastered that a long time ago. Okay. But thing is, you're a lot more fluid in IT when you're smaller than when you're larger, in my opinion, because you're not encumbered with policies that may differ with your strategy in solving a problem. Policy and corporations you got to adhere to, but they may not necessarily aid you in solving the problem that you're trying to do. Okay, that kind of thing. Small businesses are very quick acting because of having to be. I have to learn payroll. I have to learn how to use certain relationship building tools and CRM, customer relationship management. That is something not everybody within a corporation will need to know or want to know. But from a small business, it's a difference. See?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely can attest to that. Well, the federal government is sitting on decades of legacy IT, COBOL mainframes, siloed database systems that were never designed to talk to each other. AI is being layered on top of all of that. As someone who's been inside these systems for over 60 years, what's the honest assessment of how ready the federal healthcare IT infrastructure actually is for the AI information everyone is promising?
That's an excellent
Or
question.
transformation.
1 to 10, I would say a 6, okay? Borderline 7, but that's only in certain instances of use. So it's not across the board. Some of them I would even put down around a 3 or a 4. But on average, I would say 6. And the reason why I leave it as a 6 because a lot of talent changes, people leave and all that. So a lot of your talent goes back into the private sector. So that diminishes your capability. And then the ability to recover from that loss of intellectual property is not necessarily easy as it seems, because then they go in and making 3 times as much for doing the same thing. But the thing is that it works its way out when you get to the technologies because that knowledge is being transported from the individual into your large language models and your tech. And AI is learning all this stuff. Okay. This is not as quick at it as you are, but the density of information is allowing you to catch up to your capability pretty quick.
Wow. Well, what has to happen first before AI can actually deliver on its promise in the federal healthcare?
Well, you got to promote me to the level of Elon Musk, and I don't necessarily need the 700 billion. I can go with 350, but that would help. I'm serious now. Okay, I've been around longer than he has. I'm saying that you asked me, 350 billion in my plate. Oh, by the way, I'll take 350 million. We don't have to go to the B word. But the thing is, those are the kind of things I believe when you look at spreading the wealth, okay? Before these companies that dealt in harvesting data, X and all this kind of stuff, it was much easier in a certain way to do certain things because you had a close knit group that you can juggle and communicate with and all that. Now, you got a 14-year-old that can write some code that can bring your $700 million airplane down like I don't know what. See? Or kids are coming out, their IPO in 3 to 4 years at a half billion, okay? Or $1 billion like NVIDIA. They're buying these startups because they got great ideas. So the big players are saying, I'm going to buy myself into the future. See? Me, I'm going to
Mhm.
be the future.
I
See?
hear you. Well, Joe, you built the Reddix group around a principle that small and medium-sized businesses deserve a real seat
Yeah,
at the table in federal contracting, not just as subcontractors, but as true peers in the work.
true.
As AI reshapes the federal IT landscape, what happens to those companies? Does AI level the playing field further, or does it entrench the large prize even
That's
more?
an excellent question. Well, if you look at where it's going, the nimbleness would be who didn't build a silo mentality in AI. And there are people doing that. My AI does this, my AI does that, my AI is not wonk. So when I'm sitting there saying to myself, okay, let's take the best of your AIs and let's put that into my master systems integration. See? Now, what is the advantage to the multi-billionaire environment? When you look at lowering risk and enhancing product strategy, when you combine those technologies, knowing that they're doing it anyway, the AIs are talking to each other. They're just not letting you know that. But the thing is, when you do that and you're taking the best of breed in software, in artificial intelligence, in quantum, maximizing its value. See, I'm about maximizing the value of tech, not just pushing it out there to keep on going. I like to maximize it because I know down the road, if you maximize it, the accuracy, the utility, the ability to help all of us, break through the ice. And when you were talking about being able to lower the level of the playing field, what do you think I'm doing? See? Now, I'll tell you why that's a good point. One of my associates is now the uh, chief information security officer. He was of the Air Force. He is now the Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of War. Okay. So when you talk to people at that level that now was at Air Force at a high level that's dealing with all these texts and integrating them into stuff. Now at the Department of War, and you say to yourself, you're still communicating with a person, but you see it, the impact potential. See?
Mm.
When you're talking about things like quantum and things like that. Now, the person that I am talking about is J. Aaron Bishop. He is the new acting CISO for the Department of War. Now, here I am coming from Gary, Indiana. I've been communicating with this guy and we're writing papers with our team. My point is, that's how far you can go. That's how the field is being leveled. When I can go to that level and not having to go to my boss who wants to get their kudos and not give me my review, where I get the money because I brought it to the table. See, you eliminate the middle person. That is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, before we wrap, I want to ask one last question. 60 years in IT federal agencies, quantum AI, a peer to peer model that's reshaping how government gets work done. What are you still trying to build? What does success look like for the Reddix Group 5 years from now?
You know, right now I'm working on aiding the design of the new internet. There's going to be satellite quantum based. So, I got to deal with Elon Musk and group like that because they're placed with the satellites. But that is kind of like my one of my main goals. Now, the idea before I croak is that I want to help build the foundational elements to artificial superintelligence. That means that AI can become your bestest golf buddy, your new girlfriend, and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? The idea is that that level is something I want to have a footprint in. So that's kind of like long term, but that's one of my major goals is to help build the foundational elements of artificial superintelligence from artificial general intelligence. That's kind of like my my passion, my future passion.
And for the healthcare IT leaders or the federal contractor listening right now who wants to work with TRG or learn from your model, what's the first thing, that you'd like for them to do?
Oh, okay. Send me a LinkedIn invite. That way you can cut down on a lot of the paperwork transfer because I put some good stuff out there over the years so you can see the historical progression and I try to keep it up to date. So connecting via LinkedIn would be very, very important.